Michael Turner from New York State Higher Education Services Corporation. We're the New York State financial aid agency that we're in charge of administering all of New York's grant scholarship programs. We have a few other things that we're responsible for. We administer some student loan forgiveness opportunities and also have some oversight on the 529 college savings program. And so my part of the program today is to walk folks through the New York State application process as it relates to the TAP application. And this is typically because most of our audience are, folks from the state of New York who will be both applying for their FAFSA and also looking to get some aid from New York State. So we're going to be covering the students' experience of this process, where they're going to be able to kind of navigate, how do I apply for TAP? How do I, succeed at submitting this application? We're not going to be covering any of the financial aid administrator tools. I know there may be some financial aid administrators out there. This is not a training on, how to log into the HESC web and do, certain maintenance things on the student's account. This is just the application process for students. So there are two pathways to apply for financial aid in New York State.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? I'm sorry, Mike. Sure. On my end, the screen looks like it's just cutting off the very beginning of, like there's no T in 2 for 2 pathways.
Yeah, mine as well.
I'll try to unshare and then share again, and maybe hopefully that does it. Let's see. How does that look? Better? Or
it looks about the same.
I'm not sure why GoToWebinar is not fully sharing my PowerPoint. All right, I'll try just sharing the screen and see if that
works.
Yep.
That's better? Yep. Okay. So yeah, I was sharing just the application, but I guess for whatever reason, it wasn't a clear view. All right. So back onto topic. So as we're looking at the pathways of applying for New York State aid, New York State is one of the states that offers a version of the DREAM Act where our students are allowed to apply for state aid programs under various citizenship and immigration statuses that may not qualify for federal aid through FAFSA, such as students that are in the DACA program or undocumented students. So I'll briefly describe the DREAM Act pathway for those of you who are going to be assisting students that might fall into that kind of qualification. But we'll also be primarily focused on what I call the FAFSA to New York State student aid pathway, which is the application process for those folks who are going to be filing FAFSA first and then connecting to New York State from there. So on the topic of the New York State DREAM Act, as I mentioned before, it's an option for students to apply for New York State aid. The DREAM Act itself is not a scholarship. So some people say, oh, how do I get the DREAM Act scholarship in New York? There's a private funded scholarship called the Dream.us, but that's not this program. This program is basically an application process for students who usually do not meet the citizenship eligibility for federal aid, such as undocumented or DACA students, and there are other categories of student that can qualify as well, to be able to have the opportunity to apply and potentially qualify for New York State's student aid programs that we offer to other students who apply through FAFSA. So this would include the opportunity to apply for TAP, the opportunity to apply for the Excelsior Scholarship or the STEM Incentive Program. So that's what this application pathway is meant for. Now, there are special eligibility criteria that students need to meet, which are described on the application homepage, which is hesc.ny.gov/dream, including, making sure that students have graduated from a New York State high school or will be graduating from a New York State high school after attending high school in New York for 2 or more years. So all those requirements are kind of spelled out on the site. This was launched for October 1st, yesterday, just like everything else for 2021, 2022. So students can start that process now if you have high school seniors who are interested in applying. You do not need to file FAFSA in order to apply for financial aid through New York State if it's going to be through the New York State DREAM Act application. Now, within the DREAM Act application itself, they're going to select the appropriate aid year that they're applying for. There's the first sections of the application we call the eligibility application. So they first have to demonstrate that they meet the eligibility requirements under the New York State DREAM Act legislation. And so that's what the first part of the application experience is going to be. So this part of the form is not actually qualifying them for TAP or Excelsior. This is just simply indicating to us whether they're qualified under the requirements of the DREAM Act. So then we can then let them apply for TAP and our other programs. So, you know, if it's a student that's applying for 21-22, they'll have the option in the drop down to select that they're going to college next year, and they'll answer the rest of the questions. Now, depending on what citizenship immigration status they report, they may be required to upload documentation that supports their status. They're not required to upload at the point of application. They can still submit their application if they don't have their documents at the moment that they're applying, and then they could return later to their DREAM Act homepage and then upload that supporting documentation, such as, you know, high school enrollment information like their transcripts and things like that. But it would be helpful if they have that information on hand if you're doing any kind of workshops or programs where students are applying with you and you're assisting them. So to make sure that they can kind of do everything in one sitting, because we know the more we ask students to come back and finish something, the less likely they are to do so because they have other things that, you know, could distract them from this. Now, once they've submitted their application, whether they've uploaded documents or not, there'll be a link at the end of their eligibility form, which will allow them to continue to apply for New York State financial aid, which is where they actually then go on and fill out the appropriate aid application that they're looking to apply for. So that could be TAP, that could be one of the available scholarship programs. The availability of certain applications are going to be based on, you know, whether those applications are currently launched or not. So for example, a student looking to apply for the Excelsior scholarship for next school year, 2021-2022, that option is not going to be available because typically we open Excelsior in the spring of senior year. So they'd have to return to the DREAM Act application, use the continue to apply for New York State aid button, and then find the DREAM Act link, the Excelsior application link at the point in which Excelsior is made available. So they could always monitor their status. They could always return. And if they forgot to fill out for TAP, they can hit continue to apply for financial aid, and they could apply for TAP or any other grant or scholarship that they missed. They could continue a started application and upload documentation if they didn't upload documentation, and kind of monitor the color coding to see if everything has been started would be gray, if it's incomplete it would be orange, and if it's completed it would be green, to kind of give them an idea of where they are and you know, if they've done what they needed to do in terms of the application process. So we're going to shift gears now to talking about those students who aren't applying specifically through the DREAM Act, but students who will be applying for through the FAFSA, which I call the FAFSA to TAP pathway. So for that specific pathway, the FAFSA is a prerequisite. So students who are U.S. citizens, permanent residents who will be filing FAFSA prior to applying for New York State aid must file the FAFSA and make sure that the FAFSA has been successfully submitted in order to have this option to engage the TAP application on the confirmation page. So we're going to talk about the link that appears on the FAFSA confirmation page, and that's contingent on the student indicating on their application that they're going to meet the qualifications to be a New York State aid recipient. So the very first one we're looking at is whether or not they've indicated on FAFSA that they're a New York State resident. So we saw that before in the earlier session where we were going over FAFSA, how to indicate you live in New York. And this is also a snapshot of what it would look like if the students are applying on the FAFSA mobile app, which is My FAFSA. A common mistake I see, for whatever reason, when people indicate that they do not live in New York for at least 5 years. So let's say a student that just moved here a year ago. When FAFSA asks them what's their current state of legal residence, they always put where they lived previously. And if a student says on FAFSA that they're currently living in another place, like in foreign country, which I commonly see a lot, then we're not going to engage them to apply for TAP because we're going to say, all right, you haven't lived in New York for 5 years and you're saying you currently live in another country. So that's not going to allow them to have the TAP link generated. It wouldn't even let us have access to their FAFSA. Sometimes we have an issue where students get a message on our site saying that we don't have their FAFSA record. We're not obtaining FAFSAs for students who do not currently live in New York. So if you're helping students through the FAFSA, when it asks them, what is your state of legal residence? And they hit the question mark, it's going to say, well, where are you currently living? They should be listing New York. Even if they haven't lived in New York for 5 years, they're going to say, I currently live in New York. It's going to say, did you start living in New York before January 1st of a certain year? If they did, they can say yes. If they didn't, they're just going to simply enter the month and year that they started living in New York. Nowhere on the screen should they be indicating where they previously lived. FAFSA does not care about where they lived before. we're looking at where they currently live to make sure that they qualify as a resident of New York to apply for their New York State aid. And you notice everything says live. It doesn't say when did you become a citizen of the United States. It doesn't say when did you become a permanent resident and started living in New York. It's just simply when did you move? When did you start living in New York State? So sometimes students will conflate their citizenship immigration status saying, well, I didn't become a citizen of the US until last year, even though I've lived in New York for the last 10 years. We would want to see that they've lived in New York for the last 10 years, whether they were a citizen or not. So we're just looking at their place of residence, not what their immigration status was 10 years ago when they first started living here. Now, the other factor that's going to bring up whether they get that link to apply to TAP is going to be whether or not they've indicated they're interested in applying to any colleges in New York State. Whether it's a public or private college, it has to be located in New York. And we're going to be looking at that college list where they basically list the colleges that they're applying to, that list of 10 schools. If you have a New York student who's applied to 10 colleges in California, they're not going to have the link to apply for New York State financial aid because they're not applying to any qualified school. So you want to make sure that if they are, maybe intending on going out of state, but they maybe have a college in New York as a backup, like a CUNY or SUNY, that they at least include that one school in their list of 10 so they can get that link to be able to apply for state aid. So once they do get to the FAFSA confirmation page, sometimes you do have to scroll up and down on this page to find the link that's usually toward the center. It says start your state application to apply for New York State-based financial aid. So they're going to click that link, and FAFSA is going to give them a redirect message saying that we're going to send you to a new website. And then the New York State student aid payment application is going to open up as an automatic pop-up. And then they'll be able to initiate. This is a different look for those of you who've done TAP with students before. We've redesigned the homepage a little bit where now there's a start my application button that we offer to kind of make it easy to know, okay, where do I click next? We used to have a click here button, but for whatever reason, nobody knew that you're supposed to click here where it said click here. So now we have a start my application button, which should be more, stand out more so people know where they click to start. So once again, they have to engage this through the FAFSA confirmation page. It's not automatic. So some students say to me, oh, I thought when you apply for FAFSA, you automatically apply for New York State financial aid. And the answer is no. There's this link on the confirmation page that brings up the New York application, but the New York application is separate. And you have to make sure that you click on that link to be able to do that application if you want to do it at the same time that you submit FAFSA. So there's going to be a question probably already. Somebody's typing in the chat. What happens if a student, misses the link on FAFSA? How do they apply for TAP? Are they, kind of shut out? And the answer is no, they could still apply for TAP, but they have to actually wait a few days for us to receive, for New York State to receive their processed FAFSA. Usually takes about 3 to 5 days for us to get that FAFSA record. And then they can just go to our homepage, hesc.ny.gov, and on our homepage is this link that says all about TAP. And then they can click on that, and within there, there'll be a link that says, explains how to apply for TAP, and there'll be a link where they can start their TAP application if they previously submitted their FAFSA. If I try to go to this page immediately after submitting my FAFSA, and I didn't use the link on FAFSA, I'm just trying to go to the HESC website and find the TAP application. If I attempt to apply for TAP, we're not going to have their FAFSA record, and they're going to get some error messaging saying that you need to file FAFSA before you file TAP. So we get that phone call from counselors and students like, I just did FAFSA with my student. Why are you guys saying they need to do it? It's because we don't get that FAFSA instantly unless they use the link on the confirmation page, which is a special process we have that allows them to go over and apply instantaneously for TAP. Now, once they get into our system, their first thing they're going to do, assuming the student is a first-time applicant with us, is they're going to be creating a HESC account. And so we're going to bring them through the steps of doing so. There's some terms and conditions about the use of our site that they have to read and then check the box and then go next. And then moving forward, we're going to bring up their identity information. Now, if they're linking through FAFSA, their identity information will be carried over from the FAFSA form. So this screen will be pre-filled and they're not allowed to make any changes. They simply just need to go next. If the student was applying directly on the HESC website without linking through FAFSA, then they would be required to enter their identity information, which brings up an important issue. HESC identifies the student, and we verify their identity using the information they provided on their completed FAFSA application. If a student is filing for a New York State HESC account without having first applied for FAFSA or without us having received their FAFSA, let's say they just completed it 5 minutes ago, then we're not going to be able to verify their identity that they provide on their HESC account against FAFSA. So we're going to look for a secondary way of verifying it. So the student will typically be asked to provide a New York State DMV issued ID credential, like a driver's license, a learner's permit, or non-driver's license ID, in order to validate their identity. This is why I typically recommend that students use the FAFSA link when they apply for TAP, because everything carries over instantly, their identity information. They don't have to worry about this identity validation. And I also discourage counselors from doing these workshops where you have students make a bunch of HESC accounts before they even file FAFSA. Because a common mistake that we'll get is that students' identities will never be verified if the identity information that they provide on FAFSA is in conflict with any of the identity information that they provide when they make their HESC account. So what's one example? Students with multiple last names. So on their social security card, their last name is, Turner Smith with a hyphen, Turner-Smith. And when they file everything for school or whatever, they just go by Turner. But when they do FAFSA, you're teaching them, use your social security card. So they have their FSA ID, everything's under Turner Smith. But when they separately create their HESC account, they just put themselves down as Michael Turner. Well, when we get that FAFSA, we have a FAFSA for Michael Turner Smith, and we have a student who made a HESC account just simply under Michael Turner. That Michael Turner HESC account will be selected for identity verification because it doesn't match the information that was provided on FAFSA. So you do want to try to avoid these common mistakes, because we get these questions a lot from counselors like, our student doesn't have a driver's license, they don't have an ID, how do they get past this identity verification? The first thing that we say is, well, make sure that they're linking through FAFSA, so their identity comes from FAFSA, or make sure that if they're making their account separate from FAFSA, that everything matches the identity information provided on FAFSA to avoid these kind of tie-ups. So if there are errors where a student has an account that's been selected for identity verification, and it might be one of those entry errors, they put the wrong name, they put the wrong social, they put the wrong birthday, we could simply cancel that account for the student and they can recreate it. Students can actually cancel their own accounts in the account menu, or they could always contact us by call or put in an email, and we can reset their account so they can start from scratch. So let's say they do successfully get past the identity verification. Now they're going to be asked to enter their email and create a challenge question. Just one thing on email before I move forward. The primary email is the one that we email. So sometimes we get questions from parents saying, well, I put myself as the secondary email. Why am I not getting emails from HESC? And if you read the instructions, it says that we only email the secondary email if the primary email bounces back. So if we can't send a message to the first email address provided, then the secondary email is going to be emailed. We don't email both emails with our regular messaging. Everything is always going to go to the primary. So if a parent wants to, monitor everything and be the one responsible for, doing all of the things on the student's HESC account, then they should put themselves as the primary and perhaps the student as a secondary. The students will make their own user ID, and there's going to be some criteria as to, putting some letters and numbers and to make their ID. And then they're going to be asked to create a secret PIN code, which is a 4-digit code, and there's some limits on what they can use for their code. So for example, we don't let them put 1234 or 1111 for their code, and we also do not let them use their birthday as a PIN. Anybody who uses their birthday as a PIN, whether it's for your HESC account or for your ATM, you could be in for some trouble if somebody ever steals your wallet, because the first thing they try is they put your birthday when they steal your wallet. Not that I've ever done anything like that, but it's just not a good, secure thing. They're going to accept emails in case they want emails from a security event. This is optional. They could accept or decline. And then they can sign up for HESC notifications about our regular news and updates. Once again, it's not required. It's something they can opt into. Once their account is created, they'll get a successful account creation message. They'll be reminded of the user ID that they created, so they have a chance to record it along with their PIN, and then they move into the TAP application. They're first allowed to select what year they're applying for TAP, similar to FAFSA. If I'm going to college next year, it's going to be the 2022 version that I want to fill out. And there's going to be some steps on, overview of, how to navigate the application, and also the deadline to apply for TAP. Now, the reason why I bring this up, I haven't brought this up in previous trainings that we've done, is that for whatever reason, this past June 2020, I got a ton of emails from counselors, from students, and everybody was panicking. They were saying, and these were class of 2020 high school students, I'm not going to be able, due to COVID, to fill out my TAP before July 1st, 2020. And I was like, what deadline are you referring to? We give you up until the end of your school year that you're going to go to college for in order to apply for TAP, meaning that if I'm applying for TAP for next school year, 2021, 2022, you have until July 1st, 2022, nearly 2 years from now, to get in your TAP application. So keep that in mind. There is no summer, July deadline for your high school seniors. It's next summer that it would be their deadline to apply for TAP. Now, it would be in the student's best interest to apply for TAP as soon as possible if they want it in their financial aid offer, they want it in their bill, but there is no rush. So hopefully I won't get 100 emails again this summer from counselors panicking about a deadline that's misinterpreted. So there's an affirmation where they're gonna, agree that some of their information that they provide is going to be shared with various state agencies, including the New York State Department of Tax and Finance to verify the family income, or the New York State Office of Children and Family Services to verify foster care eligibility, depending on if the student says they're qualified as a foster care student. Now, if a student gets to this point in the application and they get an error message saying you need to file FAFSA, well, we've covered some of the reasons why that may have happened. So it might be that they just literally did FAFSA, they didn't use the TAP link, so we don't have FAFSA. It could be a problem with their FAFSA where their FAFSA wasn't actually processed and completed. Maybe they never did their signature page and they never submitted it and their signature was never applied and the FAFSA was never processed. Maybe they indicate that they live in a foreign country, or like a student the other day I helped indicated that he lived in Buffalo, New Jersey. And so we had the student as an out-of-state resident. And once again, we're not using FAFSAs. We're not indicating FAFSA, downloading FAFSAs for students who indicate they live in another state or in another country. So a lot of times where I'm getting messages from students and parents and counselors saying, why are we seeing this message? It's either they did FAFSA too soon or there was some type of issue or error with FAFSA that needs to be fixed in order for us to have that completed FAFSA record and allow them to apply for TAP. Now, if they get into the TAP application, a lot of it is very straightforward. Their information will be ported. You will come through the FAFSA, and a lot of this will be pre-populated. They do need to review and make sure that everything is accurate and answer any unanswered questions on this form, which is the personal information screen. And just these call outs here are showing that there is a navigation area, which shows them how far they are within the application. And there's also an application save function. We only save the application for 24 hours. So if they save it, it's meant for them to come back very shortly and finish it. If they save it and come back a week later, they'll have to start all over again. Now, there are common mistakes on this first screen that I want to call out, which generate a lot of inquiries to us and cause a lot of, sort of back-end verification and unnecessary paperwork on students. And one of those is the simple question, have you lived in New York State for all of 2020, which is what they're going to see when they do this application. It's a very simple yes or no question. If a student by accident tabs over this and puts no, then we may deny their application as not being a New York resident, or we may select them for a residency review. If they say no, they're asked to enter the month and year that they started living in New York State. Now, once again, just like I mentioned with FAFSA, this is not talking about when did you become a citizen or permanent resident. It's not talking about their citizenship or immigration status. It's just simply saying, when did you start living in New York State? And if it was for all of this year, 2020, they can say yes. If they moved here 10 years ago, they can say yes, but if they moved here, just in August, then they would say no, and they would enter 08-2020. Now, what'll happen is they'll be selected for residency review, because we're not going to assume that by the time they start college that they'll have their year of residency. So they'll have to complete what we call an electronic residency questionnaire, which can be accessed on their HESC account after their application has been processed and they're brought into this missing information status where we're questioning their residency. Another thing that we do is we also verify citizenship status, and this is something that we just started enforcing this year, where if the student indicates a citizenship status on our application, but when we look back on FAFSA, there's conflicting information or even messaging on FAFSA saying that the Social Security Administration, who confirms student citizenship status, there's what we call these C flags or ICER comment codes, which basically tell us that on FAFSA that a student citizenship status is being called into question. Now, typically financial aid offices, they're tasked with resolving that, where they would collect the student's proof of citizenship, like a passport or their permanent resident card, and they would clear it on their end. HESC is now doing that on our own end. So if we get a FAFSA that indicates the student citizenship status is in question, the student will be tasked with, as a follow-up item to HESC, providing us the same types of citizenship documentation that they're sharing with their colleges, and we will conduct our own approval as to whether or not the student meets the requirements for New York State aid through this non-DREAM Act process. Now, we'll advise a student that if you apply for FAFSA and you're a DACA student and you're not qualified that way, we would recommend that we refer them to the DREAM Act process so they can apply for state aid that way. So this verification is only for this process, which is that FAFSA to TAP process. Now, the TAP application does have a single college selection where the student's going to, by default, see the very first college located in New York State that they've listed on their application. So if this example, it's Syracuse. If I listed 10 colleges and the first one I listed was Syracuse, Syracuse is going to be the college that's defaulted for the fall and spring semester. Now, if I'm not going to go to Syracuse, I can use the will not attend button to remove it. And then there's a search option where I can replace it with the college I'd rather list. Same thing like FAFSA, we know students may not know where they're going next year, but for TAP purposes and our aid purposes, we award specifically based on the types of colleges that the student's going to be going to. Whether it's a 2-year public, 4-year public, private college, those are going to impact the amount of aid we estimate that they're eligible for. So they do need to list one college here. I typically say, what's your top choice? If the student has a favorite or a top choice college in New York, whether that's Syracuse, whether that's another school, they could just simply list that college. They should not list 4 different colleges for each semester that's presented on the screen. So this is the semester by semester. It says in the fall semester, I'm going to Syracuse. In the spring semester, I'm going to Syracuse. Some students, I see summer is at UAlbany, fall is at Cortland, winter is at Syracuse, and spring is at NYU. And it literally looks to us like they're going to be transferring colleges every semester next year. That's not the way that they should be filling this out. It's a single college selection. So out of those 4 colleges, where am I most likely to go? And if I don't go there, at a later point, there's functionality on our website where they could change that college. Now, depending on the college they list, they'll be asked to list the student ID number for that specific school. So in this example, it's still Syracuse. And if the student has or is already aware of their student ID number, they can enter it. If they don't know it, which might be the case depending on how early they're applying, they could just simply leave the student ID number box blank, and then they can check the box saying that I don't know or I don't have my student ID, and it would allow them to continue. The student ID numbers will be required at some point moving forward because this is how we identify students with their college in order to report their awards to them. Now, there's a back-end process where colleges can provide that to us, and there's also this front-end process where if a student knows it, they can provide it to us. So for example, if a student has done their CUNY admissions, they have their MPL ID number, which is CUNY's ID number. That's usually the same no matter which CUNY school they go to, they can enter that number and we'll have it stored in the system. But if they don't know it, then they could just leave it blank and they can check the box. We're gonna ask about the student's marital status. So they're gonna answer, parents, be careful not to marry your child to your husband or wife. I've seen that as a mistake. Not that common, but it happens. And then we're going to be asking the students about their dependency status. And we have a different way of qualifying students as independent in New York State as opposed to the way that FAFSA does it. So these questions here are about students being able to declare they're financially independent from their parents and also declaring whether or not they meet the qualification as a foster youth, ward of the court, or orphan on or after age 13. Now, in order to qualify automatically for independence, on FAFSA, if I'm 24 years old or older and I live with my mom, it doesn't matter where I live, I'm going to be considered independent. For New York State, the automatic age of independence is 36 years old. So if I'm 32 years old and I want to go to community college and I still live with my mom, I'm going to need my mom's information because I'm financially dependent on her. I'm living in her house. I'm sure she's paying for some of my living expenses in order to apply for New York State aid. But if I'm 38 years old and I still live with my mom, then I wouldn't need her information when I'm applying for New York State because by age, I'll be independent. And that's going to conflict with FAFSA because like students will call us all the time and say, well, FAFSA says I'm independent because I'm 25, but you're asking me for my parents' information. And it's because of this nuance that if you're younger than 36, you need to be able to demonstrate that you're financially independent. You pay your own expenses, you live in your own house, you are not claimed by your parents. So there's going to be a sequence of questions on the TAP application that test whether or not the student meets those requirements of being considered financially independent from their parents. So it asks, do your parents claim you on or plan to claim you on the 2020 and 2021 taxes? Are you living in their house, apartment, or a building owned by them? It doesn't ask whether you pay rent to them or not. It's simply living there. So if I'm living with my parents, that can disqualify me for independence. The gifts, loans, or financial assistance. A lot of people put no to this, and I have 2 kids. They definitely cost me more than $750 a year. This question is not asking, do your parents buy you Louis Vuitton bags and, Balenciaga sneakers and stuff like that are very lavish, expensive, $1,000, $2,000 gifts. They're asking, does the student receive financial support? Are they getting support? So if a student was set up to live in an apartment by their parents and the parents were paying the student's rent, that would be a yes to this question. I am getting gifts or support from my parents that exceed $750 a year. If kids live with their parents, then this is definitely a yes. My kids eat up my refrigerator, they use the internet, they use the electricity, they annoy me, and that's all value more than $750 a year. So this question is typically yes for a traditional dependent student. Now, the special conditions screen would come up if a student claims that they happen to be independent from their parents financially, but we see by age they're younger than 22. So if a student's 25 and says, oh yeah, I claim myself, I live on my own, we're gonna take that, as they're independent. But if a student's 18 and says, oh yeah, I live on my own, I file my own taxes, I do my own thing financially, then they need to have a special circumstance, or what we call a special condition, to qualify them as independent. So what's going to happen here is that the TAP application is going to say, well, do you have one of these qualifying conditions? So are your parents disabled or totally and permanently disabled, or are they declared incompetent? Are you a ward of the court or in the foster care system? Are you getting public assistance under your own budget, not including food stamps? Are you, do you have a situation, we call this an involuntary dissolution, which might be the one that some folks commonly use, where they're no longer under their parents' care due to circumstances that are beyond their control. So that one we commonly get a lot for all those kind of, gray area situations where students are not living with parents because of, whatever family history they have. Any student who makes a claim of special circumstances for independence will be selected for missing information. We will want to collect the same types of documentation that a financial aid office would collect to verify the student's independence for state aid purposes. So just like they're doing with their college financial aid office, sending them, letters from their school counselors, court documents, whatever it may be, when they do their TAP application, in the days after their application is processed, they'll get an email from us saying your application needs information, and they'll see an upload area where they can upload to us the same counsel letters, court documentation, and things that they're sharing with their college to prove their special circumstances for independence. Now, if the student's considered dependent, our application is going to call out that we are going to ask questions about their parents. So this is a new screen. It's going to direct them to say the next questions you're seeing are about your parents. And that'll start with parent marital status. Now, depending on the marital status of the parent, they may or may not be required to enter a marital status date. So if I say I'm married or divorced, I'll have to enter the month and year of that status. And it's the same thing. They should be using a similar date on FAFSA. And we already discussed, what if they don't know it, or, they need to use whatever they're going to be using on FAFSA. There's also a question here about, do parents live in New York State? I've seen students by accident answer this as no as well, just by quickly going through the application and not paying attention. So make sure that, if the parents do live in New York, that they do indicate the parents live in New York. It'll ask, do the parents file New York State income taxes? Everything is based on the New York State 2019 tax returns, and that could have been an IT-201 or an IT-203, or maybe they didn't file state taxes, maybe they only did federal. They'll have those options. They should double check what type of income tax return the parents filed before answering this question. I've seen too many students arbitrarily answer, oh yeah, it's a 203. I'm guessing that's the one they did. 203 is for part-time residents, and we'll select the student for residency review. We're going to question their New York State residency if we see that their parents only file a part-time resident tax return. So they should do their best to not make a mistake. And if they don't have their parents' New York taxes, you hit save, you send them home, you tell them find out, and then come back the next day at school or whatever, or if you have your virtual one-on-one with the student, and figure out what taxes they did in New York State for 2019 and enter the appropriate 201 or 203 designation. Now, if a student's parent did not file any taxes, the student will simply indicate my parent didn't file any taxes for 2019, and then they'll be asked about any unreported income. So if the parent didn't work and didn't earn any income from work in 2019, they could simply hit continue, which would say no, or they could enter in whatever the untaxed income the parents earned in 2019 was, and then move forward. Once we get into the tax information is all squared away, we'll ask for the parent's information. Now, if they're a tax filer, it'll ask about what kind of tax return filing status do they use, like married, filing jointly, head of household. If they're a non-tax filer, they don't file taxes, then they'll just simply be answered to and be asked to enter the socials, tax ID numbers, and last names of their parents. Now, the social or tax ID number is different from FAFSA because FAFSA only takes socials. New York State TAP, we do take the tax ID number if the parent has one. If the parent does not have either a social or tax ID, then there's a checkoff box where they're simply going to be able to indicate my parent doesn't have one, and they leave the social security number box blank. Do not put zeros or nines or any other placeholder numbers in the social security number tax ID number box if the parent doesn't have a social. Simply leave it blank and check the box underneath, and that's how you designate to us a parent doesn't have a social. Now, if a parent does not have a social security number and either uses a tax ID number or doesn't have any identifying number, we're going to send a form that the student needs to complete, which is an indication to us they fill out saying that their parent doesn't have a social. That form is going to be a missing information item that the student will have to complete in the days after their TAP application is submitted. It is not a signature page. I'll repeat that one more time. It is not a signature page. I got a lot of questions over the summer about, oh, we submitted the signature page 20 times. Why aren't the students' applications completed? And it was because we got the signature page, but we never got the social security number page that we asked for that needs to be filled out for parents who indicate they don't have a social. So keep in mind that if you are helping a student who's going to be in this boat where their parents don't have a social or they file with a tax ID, there's going to be a follow-up document that you're going to have to help your student obtain and submit online to us to help complete their application. Another thing to call out here is that if the student has a single parent household, you know, they have a divorced, separated, never married parent, they are not required to list both parents. So if they have a single parent household, they can enter all of their single parents' information for parent one and just simply leave parent two blank. Please do not volunteer or give us any information about a second parent who's a non-custodial parent who's not in the household. Now, if the students indicate their parents filed New York State taxes, we're going to point them out typically to line 37 of their IT-201 to indicate what their New York State net taxable income is. So that's why it also would be helpful. Whatever they report here, whether they actually have the line 37 and they put the number, whether they guess what the line 37 number is, whether they put 0 for line 37, we verify all of these numbers with the New York State Department of Tax and Finance. So, you know, sometimes accounts will say, well, they lost their taxes. They kind of have an estimate of what it is. I mean, you can put an estimate in here. We will eventually get the actual number. So it helps the student if they want an accurate award estimate up front to put the real line 37. But if they put an estimate, we will eventually, you know, give them an actual award based on a verification of their parents' income taxes and what the line 37 amount was. Income adjustments. You know, this might be a common question that's going to come up in the Q&A when we enter into that momentarily. You know, we're using 2019 income. Folks are affected by the pandemic. They may have lost their jobs. They may have had changes in income situations since 2019 and 2019's taxes. Right now, this has always been the case for New York State financial aid. We only allow income adjustments for only a certain set of circumstances, and that's divorce or separation of parents, resulting in a change in income, death of a wage-earning parent, obviously resulting in a change of income, or the total and permanent disability of a wage-earning parent that results in a change of income this year. We do not currently accept income appeals or adjustment requests for loss of employment or for one-time income distributions. So, you know, we get calls from families saying, oh, I sold a house last year. That's why my income is higher. Unfortunately, we don't change for that. Now, the colleges have a lot more authority under FAFSA and under federal aid to have much more flexibility to change income. We are limited in program regulation to these circumstances only, so any other types of income adjustment requests will be rejected. Now, the FAFSA will ask if the parents are disabled, so they indicate yes or no, and if they are, they give us a month and year of when the parent became permanently disabled. And then we transition back to the student's information. So we have these call outs now telling students this is about your parent and this is about you, the student. because we did see common errors, such as on the student tax information, where students were double reporting their parents' tax information, kind of not reading the screen, saying, oh, they're asking me about taxes again, so I got to put my parents' tax information. So I literally had students who their applications were coming in denied because the total family income was 160,000, because the parents said they made 80,000, and then the student said they also made 80,000, and it was clearly double reporting the income. Now we can fix these things, but it's a lot of back end work, and we don't want these situations up front. So students need to clearly know when they're filing, or parents when they're filing, that this is asking about the student's income tax status for 2019's taxes. And if the student simply didn't file, they'll say, I will not file in New York or any tax return, and they'll be asked to report unreported income. So if I had a summer job in 2019, did I earn any money where I didn't file taxes necessarily, but I still had some wages or some income? And I'm going to report that and answer whether or not the student has children. And then I'm asked if I have other family members attending college full time. And if I do, I'm asked to enter the names and socials of those relatives, because there is an adjustment, a small adjustment, but an adjustment to help students be more qualified for aid for TAP if they have more than one family member attending college full time. Once they get past all those questions, they're on the signature area. Parents do have to provide a signature, which is basically used as an acknowledgement that we are authorized to verify their tax information with the New York State Department of Tax and Finance. There are two options to submit parent signatures. They can choose to e-sign, or they could choose to sign on paper. Whichever one they choose, if they choose to e-sign, they need to have a New York State DMV issued ID in order to enter that driver's license, learner's permit, or non-driver's license number, and my date of birth, and then e-sign my name, and then you submit it, and it might work. If you get a red message saying it's not working, there could be multiple reasons why it may not work. But then they also have the option to go to paper if they're not able to e-sign. It only takes IDs issued by the New York State DMV. So if the parent has a New York City municipal ID, that NYC ID, that doesn't work. If the parent has another state's a driver's license, that's not going to work. So it has to be a New York State DMV issued ID, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a driver's license. It could be a non-driver's license. Now, if they choose to go paper signature, they'll get a pop-up window where they could download and print the paper signature option. This does not need to be mailed, although they could be mailed to us. We prefer that they actually be uploaded through the student's individual HESC account. We had this issue during the pandemic where counselors were emailing us packets of 30, 40 parent signature pages that no one was actually present in the office to open and scan and put in our system. So it greatly delayed our ability to apply the signatures to a lot of TAP applications. And that situation, of course, was unique to the pandemic. But if the student had instead used the individual upload option, like for all missing information for their application, we put a request on their account and we put an upload area where they can attach as a document, a PDF or whatever, the copy of the parent signature page. We will accept that and we will update it. And we accept all different types of signatures because we're taking a digital version of this page. If they want to use a digital signature program to e-sign this by using an Adobe Fill and Sign or a DocuSign or whatever it might be, if they don't want to print or they don't have a printer, that is acceptable as long as they get the signature applied to the document and then they attach that appropriately through the student's HESC account, and then we can then try to quickly update them. So once it's been signed, they get validation that it's either been e-signed successfully or paper signed successfully, and then they get their application summary where they're then allowed to kind of review, and if they need to modify any of their questions on the application, there'll be an individual link that says modify your answer where they can make those changes. And then they go to the submission page where the student then e-signs. All students will be able to e-sign. They do not need a DMV ID to e-sign their TAP application. They just simply type their name, affirm, agree to the affirmation, and then they hit submit. So, and then they're going to get a congratulations message and with a little bit of information about how to follow up, and they're done. Students can, in the days following the processing of their TAP applications do not process instantaneously. We do get those calls. I always get a call like, I just did the TAP application. Can you see what I'm going to get? It doesn't work like that. It does take some time, just like FAFSA, to process in our system. About 3 to 5 days. The student can log in through their HESC account, which we have a quick link, which is hcsc.ny.gov/my account. And there's this review my NYS financial aid information link where they could check their status, see if there's missing information. There'll be the upload areas. There's a link under there that allows them to change their college name. So they can do some self-service and account maintenance by just logging in and checking on their status, about 3 or 5 days or a week or so after they submit their application to us. So this process is how we do the TAP application. It's not specifically how we're applying for the Excelsior Scholarship or any of our special programs. Those do have their own scholarship application processes, which we're not going to be covering here.